When they heard him, they were pleased and promised to pay him money. Then he looked for an opportunity to hand him over.
On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him,
"Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?"
He sent 2 of his disciples and said to them,
"Go into the city, and the man will meet you, carrying a jar of water. Follow him. Wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, 'Where's my guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upper room, furnished and ready. Make the preparations for us today."
The disciples then went off, entered the city, and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he came with the 12. And as they reclined at table and were eating, Jesus said,
"Amen, I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me."
They began to be distressed and to say to him, one by one,
"Surely it is not I."
He said to them,
"One of the 12, the one who dips me into the ditch. For the Son of Man indeed goes as is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better if that man had never been born."
While they were eating, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them, and said,
"Take it, it's my body."
Then he took a cup, gave thanks, and gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them,
"This is my blood of the covenant, which will be shed for many. Amen, I say to you, I shall not drink again the fruit of the vine until I drink it new in the kingdom of God."
Then, after singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them,
"And all of you will have your faith shaken, for it is written, I'll strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be dispersed. But after I've been raised up, I shall go before you to Galilee."
Peter said to him,
"Even though all shall have their faith shaken, mine will not be."
Then Jesus said to him,
"Amen, I say to you, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times."
But he vehemently replied,
Even though I should have to die with you, I will not deny you.
and they all spoke similarly. Then they came to a place named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples,
"Sit here while I pray."
He took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be troubled and distressed. Then he said to them,
"My soul is sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and keep watch."
He advanced a little and fell to the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass by him. He said,
"Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me, but not what I will, but what you will."
When he returned, he found them asleep. He said to Peter,
"Simon, are you asleep? Can you not keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you might not undergo the test. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak."
Withdrawing again, he prayed, saying the same thing. Then he returned once more and found them asleep, for they could not keep their eyes open and did not know what to answer him. He returned a 3rd time and said to them,
"Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let us go. See, my betrayer is at hand."
Then, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, accompanied by a crowd with swords and clubs, who had come from the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. His betrayer had arranged a signal with them, saying,
"The man I shall kiss is the one. Arrest him and lead him
came and immediately went over to him and said,
Rabbi.
and he kissed him. At this they laid hands on him and arrested him. One of the bystanders drew his sword, struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his ear. Jesus said to them in reply,
Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to seize me? Day after day I was with you, teaching in the temple area, yet you did not arrest me, but that the scriptures may be fulfilled.
And they all left him and fled. Now a young man followed him, wearing nothing but a linen cloth about his body. They seized him, but he left the cloth behind and ran off naked. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. Peter followed him at a distance into the high priest's courtyard and was seated with the guards, warming himself at the fire. The chief priests and the entire Sanhedrin kept trying to obtain testimony against Jesus in order to put him to death, but they found none. Many gave false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Some took the stand and testified falsely against him. A bystander said, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another not made with hands. Even so, their testimony did not agree. The high priest rose before the assembly and questioned Jesus, saying,
Have you no answer? What are these men testifying against you?
But he was silent and answered nothing. Again, the high priest asked him and said to him,
Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?
Then Jesus answered,
I am, and you'll see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power, and coming with the clouds of heaven.
At that the high priest tore his garments and said,
What further need we of witness? You have heard the blasphemy? What do you think?
They all condemned him as deserving to die. Some began to spit on him. They blindfolded him and struck him and said to him,
Prophesy.
and the guards greeted him with blows. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the high priest's maids came along. Seeing Peter warming himself, she looked intently at him and said,
You two are with the Nazarene Jesus.
but he denied it, saying,
I neither know or understand what you are talking about.
So he went out into the outer court. Then the cock crowed. The maid saw him and began again to say to the bystanders.
This man is one of them.
Once again, he denied it. A little later, the bystanders said to Peter once more.
Surely you are one of them, for you too are Galilean.
He began to curse and to swear,
I do not know this man of whom you are talking.
and immediately a cock crowed a second time. Then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had said to him.
Before the cock crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times.
He broke down and wept. As soon as morning came, the chief priests with the elders and the scribes, that is, the whole Sanhedrin, held a council. They bound Jesus, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate. Pilate questioned him.
Are you the king of the Jews?
He said to him in reply,
You say so.
The chief priests accused him of many things. Again, Pilate questioned him.
Have you no answer? See how many things they accuse you of.
Jesus gave him no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. Now on the occasion of the feast, he used to release to them one prisoner whom they requested. A man called Barabbas was then in prison, along with the rebels who had committed murder in rebellion. The crowd came forward and began to ask him to do for them as he was accustomed. Pilate answered,
Do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews?
for he knew that it was out of envy that the chief priest had handed him over. But the chief priest stirred up the crowd to have him release Barabbas for them instead. Pilate again said to them in reply.
Then what do you want me to do with this man you call the king of the Jews?
They shouted again.
Crucify him!
Pilate said to them.
Why? What evil has he done?
They only shouted the louder.
Crucify him!
So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas to them, and, after he had Jesus scourged, handed him over to be crucified. The soldiers led him away inside the palace, that is the praetorium, and assembled the whole cohort. They clothed him in purple, and weaving a crown of thorns, placed it on him. They began to salute him with,
Hail, King of the Jews!
and kept striking his head with a reed and spitting upon him. They knelt before him in homage, and when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak, dressed him in his own clothes, and led him out to crucify him. They pressed into service a passerby, Simon, a Cyrenian, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. They brought him to the place of Golgotha, which is translated, place of the skull. They gave him wine drunk with myrrh, but he did not take it. Then they crucified him and divided his garments by casting lots for them to see what each should take. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." With him they crucified 2 revolutionaries, one on his right and one on his left. Those passing by reviled him, shaking their heads and saying,
Aha! You who destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself by coming down from the cross.
Likewise, the chief priests with the scribes mocked him among themselves and said,
He saved others, he did not save himself. Let Christ, the King of Israel, come down from the cross, that we may see and believe.
Those who were crucified with him also kept abusing him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, and at 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,
which is translated,
my God, why have you forsaken me?
Some of the bystanders who heard it said,
Look, he is calling Elijah.
one of them ran, soaked a sponge with wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying,
Wait, let us see if Elijah comes to take him down.
Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. The veil of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. When the centurion who stood facing him saw how he breathed his last, he said,
Truly, this man was the Son of God.
There were also women looking on from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of the younger James and of Jose, and Salome. These women had followed him when he was in Galilee and ministered to him. There were also many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. When it was already evening, since it was the day of preparation, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a distinguished member of the council, who was himself awaiting the kingdom of God, came and courageously went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Pilate was amazed that he was already dead. He summoned the centurion and asked him if Jesus had already died. And when he learned of it from the centurion, he gave the body to Joseph. Having bought a linen cloth, he took him down, wrapped him in the linen cloth, and laid him in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock.